Yeah, good morning, everybody. Also from our side, we are really grateful to the organizers of this conference, to the African Development Bank, and to the Center for African Development for this invitation to be part of this important symposium. So what I'm going to do together with my colleague Heiner Janus to present to you a little bit, let's say, the political economy of a rather new aid modality, new aid instruments, so results-based aid. And what we are going to do is to introduce a little bit the concept. So from our understanding, results-based aid is really a quite new way how to organize the aid business. And so against this background, we want to explain to you our understanding of the concept and what we would also like to do in the second step to draw some first conclusions coming from experiences into sub-Saharan African countries in Ghana and Tanzania. So first of all, let me give you a little bit, the background, how we are looking at this discussion from our perspective. What we see or what we saw over the last 10 to 15 years is, first of all, a quite intense discussion on aid effectiveness. So it was already mentioned the very important events about the Paris Agenda, Accra, and last week in Mexico we had the first global partnership meeting, which is the successor of the Paris arrangement. And part of this aid effectiveness debate was and still is, of course, very important discussions around aid allocation, selectivity. So what is most important, should we focus on those countries in need of resources, or should we focus on those countries where we have good indicators that they are really performing? This kind of discussion. Which sectors are most important? The discussion we had yesterday, is agriculture really outstanding? So should our focus be really on this sector? What's about social sectors, etc.? Another very important discussion, and I think we saw very important contributions in this regard, the debate on the impact of aid, so especially those regressions on aid and growth. Burnside Dollar, FinTab, he contributed also to this debate, saying aid is really one main element for good performers when it comes to growth. Then we have another of other contributors, including William Easterly, saying this is nonsense, the causality is the other way around. We have a very similar debate when it comes to the impact of aid on governance, and Nick is, of course, one of the main contributors to this debate. So you have this very important discussion. And finally, the whole question of aid modalities and aid instruments. And our discussion is trying to cover a number of those aspects. When it comes to aid modalities and instruments, let me just give you one main idea. On the left-hand side, you will find a number of bullet points dealing with, let's say, the traditional way how aid was, and I think still is, mainly delivered. This is that we organize projects. At the same time, we know about a number of disadvantages if we just provide projects, because those projects have high transaction costs. Those projects are normally rather supply-driven. We have little ownership, etc., etc. So what we know from past experiences, that the traditional way how we organize, how we deliver aid by projects is rather not very convincing way how to facilitate, how to trigger development. On the right-hand side, you will find our view of the Paris Agenda, and this agenda is saying mainly that we should move from projects to programs. This is program-based approaches. Programs organized, owned, implemented by partner countries. So donors should not organize and implement their own projects, donor projects, but they should support those activities, those interventions organized and implemented and monitored by partner countries. And let's say the highest level of the Paris agenda, so to say, is to provide budget support. That's a little bit one conclusion based on the debate of aid effectiveness. Another background beside aid effectiveness is the whole discussion around the dynamic context for aid in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think what we discussed yesterday was really very important. Against this background, the whole debate about emerging Africa. Is Africa really emerging? What does it mean for the poor population? Are all countries part of this kind of dynamic process? At the same time, we have some other aspects which are related, at least to some extent, to this discussion around emerging Africa. And part of it is decreasing aid dependency of sub-Saharan African countries. And I think this trend is really quite significant for all our aid discussions. So what we can see is that not only middle-income countries in sub-Saharan Africa, but even low-income countries, that the aid dependency rate is really decreasing, and this trend is quite likely to continue over the next couple of years. What we also see in a number of countries is, including poor countries, low-income countries, is something like a demand for new business models, how to organize aid. And the debate on budget support over the last 10 years was part of it, that a number of countries were really demanding donors to provide aid in a different way. Finally, we have a discussion around beyond aid approaches. So this term is indicating that aid should be also organized in a different way, just to make sure that aid is catalytic in a way, that aid is used to leverage other approaches, especially coming from the private sector. So what I want to say is that also this kind of new context is very dynamic and also influencing the whole aid debate. So let me turn to the more specific question about results-based aid. And what I want to say here very briefly is that we have a quite broad results agenda, results discussion over the last couple of years. And part of this discussion is that we have a number of debates around results-based management, so how aid should be organized in terms of management ways, how to be more results focused. But at the same time, and this is our focus, is that we are also looking for specific ways, specific instruments, specific modalities, how to introduce a very incentive focused approach that we achieve results. And this is our main focus here. So what is the difference between results-based aid and traditional aid in terms of project aid? So if I would present this nice slide to representatives from donor agencies, of course they would totally disagree with what I'm going to say, because what I'm saying is aid is normally input-oriented. What we do is we want to achieve 0.7% of our GDP should be provided as aid. What we are doing is we provide funding for a new school. What we are doing is we send an advisor to the Ministry of Health, etc. All this is mainly input-oriented, and this has to do with many aspects. You can nicely measure your input. So we are giving $100 to this country, and this is quite easy just to explain it to your own population, etc. So that can be done. We had similar examples when it comes to social protection, so you can measure what is the share of GDP provided for social protection. But what is rather difficult is to go to this side of the slide to measure what is the outcome or the impact of what you are doing. And this is normally where donor agencies are quite weak to show really convincing evidence what you are doing. And what results-based aid is trying to do is to say we are not measuring what is our input for a specific area, but what we are measuring is really the outcome, our result we want to achieve, and this is our main focus. Against this background, let me give you a brief definition. What are main criteria for results-based aid against this background? First of all, if we are talking about results-based aid, the partner government is in charge, has responsibilities for results. And that's quite different from our traditional aid model, where the aid agency is the implementing agency, and of course they have this kind of responsibility also for the impact. What aid providers and partner governments are doing is to agree on a contract. It's really a contract, and this is a transparent contract saying that we use the national systems when it comes to the implementation of our intervention. A third aspect is that both contract partners are agreeing in advance on the results. So normally what donor agencies like to do is to have a look in a quite late stage on what they achieved, but they are shying away and identifying in advance what are the results which are intended to be achieved. For us, results should be quantifiable, so they should be measurable. Those results should be achievable in incremental steps. So what we are in need of is a unit price, which can be rewarded at the end. And we need a system where we can verify on a regular basis, for example, on an annual basis, what was achieved in the last year. The fifth point is that for this kind of approach, we need a mechanism in place to make sure that the verification is done on an independent basis. And finally, and that's also quite different from the existing aid model of donor agencies, that payments are only done upon achievement of goals. If you know the rationale of aid agencies, the World Bank, or bilateral donors, there's a strong incentive to do the transfer at the end of the year and not to stop the transfer. So that's a quite different rationale. That's just to give you an impression on in which areas, in which different levels you might apply results-based aid. So if you go down from a way abstract level, you can use results-based aid already for the selection and allocation of aid. And I think the Millennium Challenge cooperation approach of the United States is a quite prominent and important example in this regard, because the MCC is something like an ex-ante conditionality, and only if countries are eligible because of their performance, they have access to the MCC funding system. You can also identify on a macro level for general budget support, or also on the sector level for sector budget support, specific results-based approaches. So even when it comes to budget support, it's normally very much input focused, that you are saying we support this reform process with this amount of money, but you find rather few examples where donors are using budget support with the intention to reward results at the end. And then you have, and this is to some extent quite prominent in the ongoing debate, one specific results approach is like the cash on delivery approach, which was designed by the Center for Global Development in Washington, D.C., where you are choosing just one indicator, for example, school enrollment in a specific district, and this is most important when it comes to your intervention. Very briefly, since I'm running already out of time and I want to hand over in a couple of minutes to Heiner, when it comes to this kind of concept, results-based aid, we can identify, of course, several advantages like the direct use of incentives, this focus on results, a strengthened domestic accountability system because we are using the national system of the partner country. So we have a couple of quite important potential advantages. At the same time, there are also a number of challenges or potential disadvantages. And let me just mention some examples in this regard, misincentives or perverse incentives. Let's say we create a strong incentive that the enrollment rate is going to be increased in one specific district. Maybe we create an incentive that all teachers are transferred from District B to District A just to make sure that we get those results in District A, and this might create a number of perverse incentives. We might have also tensions with the aid effectiveness agenda because donors really like to focus on their specific contribution, and this might be not in line with the aid effectiveness agenda. And just to give you a final example in this regard, there might be also one threat that against the background of rather negative examples with regard to budget support in the last 5 to 10 years, that, because of difficult political situations in a number of countries, donors had to suspend or to delay budget support rather often because of, the elections last week were not really that transparent. You have human rights difficulties, etc., etc. Against this background, a number of donors had really difficulties just to continue with budget support. And results-based aid might be one option how you can try to be more technical to some extent and saying we in a way we ignore this kind of political context, we just focus on our technical results. My last two slides just briefly, so in case you want to get back to this later on during the discussions, I think since results-based aid is really on incentives, it makes sense to have more thoughts on how we apply this kind of approach. Just to give you one example in this regard, I think results-based aid is of course about financial incentives. Yeah, we give a reward, but there are also a number of non-financial incentives attributed to it. Just to give you one example, what donors like to do is to get, this kind of ownership on the top level in the partner country. So if your Minister for Development Cooperation is successful to get the confirmation of the president in the country, and the president is saying, my line minister and the district, they have to make sure that all these things are implemented. Of course, you have very strong non-financial incentives. And there are also a number of other side aspects in this regard, and that's quite important. Finally, this kind of business model has a number of important aspects with regard to the partner country. So for partner countries, of course, it is important to know, to understand, is this contribution part of my country envelope, or is it in addition? It is quite important for the partner country to understand the risk system. Are you going to have a risk that the amount of money available for your country is going to be reduced because of, let's say, a poor performance when it comes to this specific intervention? Or are we going just to do some kind of rearrangement? So if we are not successful with this project, we get the money anyhow, maybe we use it for another project. So this kind of, political economy of results-based aid is also very important. So I would like to hand over to Heiner to get to the more concrete country examples. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let me just continue and add some first experiences from two countries, from Ghana and Tanzania. And so our starting point in doing this research was that the conceptual side of the debate is already quite developed. Stephan showed what kind of thinking is behind this new modality and what kind of challenges there might be. But we were more interested also to look at the first pilots in this regard, looking at first implementation experiences, how does this play out. A lot of programs just started, but very prominently the World Bank since 2012 has a new lending modality called Program for Results, which very much reflects this thinking we presented. So our question was, what kind of benefits and what kind of challenges can you observe in these first pilots? And the two pilots we picked are both in the sector of fiscal decentralization or governance. This is a bit unusual because Stephan was saying that you want to move towards the output level and the outcomes. So usually health and education might be sectors where you can do that more easily with measuring enrollment or immunization levels and so on. But governance in certain areas could also work. Especially if you look at these more technical areas of fiscal decentralization, looking at the performance of local governments, how can they be incentivized to perform better in terms of financial management. And already there's some experience with doing performance-based grant systems. So these type of systems have been implemented since some years already. And also another advantage is that you can see very clearly the types of political incentives that local governments operate under and how it links to central government. So the two cases we picked are one in Ghana. It's a basket fund where two or four donors together pay into a fund that is then distributed to local governments. It's 216 districts in all over Ghana. They're assessed every year on terms of their financial management performance, and depending on how well they perform, they get additional funds from this donor-funded basket. And these funds are discretionary, so local governments can use them in whatever way they like to fund local development projects, such as building roads, building irrigation systems, and so on. The second case we looked at is Tanzania. It's a World Bank funded program that has just started in 2012. It's a similar principles. Local governments are assessed, but in this case, it's only 18 bigger cities. And also every year they go under this performance assessment, and depending on the assessment results, they achieve additional funds. One interesting difference to the Ghana case is that in Tanzania there's an added incentive for the ministry to perform well. So the ministry in charge of local governments, depending on how it manages this fund, can mobilize additional funding from the World Bank. So you have these incentives operating at the local level, but also at the national level. And then the way we approached this was to translate basically all these questions that we had into one framework. And just very broadly, we oriented this along the OECD's criteria for evaluating aid programs. So how relevant are they? How effective are the programs? How efficient? What type of impact do they make? And can they be sustainable? And then let me just briefly explain what I found in Ghana. So there's a real need at the local level to mobilize additional funds, and also this approach to use performance indicators is very welcome in the country, but still it's donors that are clearly driving this process. So we had kind of the observation that there might be interest from the partner country as well, but clearly it's donors having this agenda that they want to demonstrate results, they want to try these new things. So it was also in Ghana, this was the case. In terms of effectiveness, you can see already that a lot of local districts significantly improved their performance in the first years. And there are some interesting cases, for instance, where the smaller, poorer districts that were thought to perform more poorly on these assessments actually outperformed the capital of Accra. And this then generated all types of media attention, and these non-financial incentives really worked well here, so that there was a lot of pressure on the capital also to perform better and mobilize these funds. But then in terms of aid effectiveness, how well is this aligned with other donors? How well is this aligned with the partner country system? It's more of a mixed result we see. In terms of efficiency, these things are actually quite cost efficient. If you compare them to other ways of distributing funds to the local level, they are not more expensive to administer than other traditional projects. But they generate quite some costs that are not so easily to observe in terms of what type of reporting local governments have to make, for instance. And in terms of impact, it's still very early to assess that, but you can see these first improvements very clearly. More districts qualify for the funds, more districts perform well. But now in the last 2 years, there's like a performance plateau, so it's difficult to improve beyond a certain level if all the local governments meet the highest standards already. So very often in these results-based approaches, we find that incentives lose their relevance after some time, and then there is this need to discuss how to adjust the program. So that's a current situation there. And in terms of long-term prospects, it's really unclear whether this can be taken up from the government in Ghana, whether there's like a mainstreaming of a stronger result orientation, but that is certainly the idea behind these new approaches. And then quickly, Tanzania, it's similar experiences there. The funds are also quite crucial to local development. And there, the background is a bit different because the World Bank is really the only donor left in financing decentralization. A lot of donors withdrew from this sector, and this kind of performance-based approach is really trying to restart the decentralization process there. Then in terms of effectiveness, there's not much to observe because it's just in the first year. And also there you can see that there are tensions with the aid effectiveness agenda. The World Bank has a project implementation unit there, for instance, that administers the whole program and kind of duplicates national structures just to make sure that this program is working. Also cost efficiency, it's a balanced performance in this regard, but there are additional costs at the local level. The more long-term prospects are a bit too early to observe, but maybe one interesting fact is that the government itself now has started a national reform program called Big Results Now, and that kind of mirrors this orientations that donors have also on the domestic side. So there's clearly this awareness that result orientation is important. And then finally, just some preliminary recommendations that we have. It's really important to involve partner countries closely in designing these things, and especially design phase is very important for these programs to work well. The programs have to be quite simple and not too burdensome to manage. And these programs usually only work there where there's already an existing motivation to achieve results. And I think this is a lesson we also learned from the aid effectiveness literature, that conditionality doesn't work. You cannot force the governments to do something that they are not interested in. So this can be a positive enforcement of an existing reform dynamic. In terms of implementation, the lessons we have from the aid effectiveness agenda also remain relevant for these type of modalities. There where incentives kind of lose their relevance, this dialogue about how to adjust these projects should come into place. And certainly the main challenge overall is to reflect a stronger results orientation beyond these kind of limited programs in the broader work of the government. So, thank you very much.